Welcome to the second episode of the F-Team. The F-Team is a fortnightly webinar and podcast series where we discuss the latest happenings and trends in business technology. In this episode, we're talking new updates in Office 365, the Windows 95's 25th birthday, how to avoid failed backups for your critical services, which is more interesting than it sounds, and some key considerations when adopting a multi-cloud strategy. Did I mention I'm your host, Hayden Van Roon? Let's get into it, shall we? Our first guest is a man who lives and breathes endpoint management. And we have a sneaky feeling that he's been using some PowerShell magic to keep his Microsoft Teams presence perpetually set to available. I'm talking, of course, about Varun Kapoor. Welcome to your first F-Team webinar and podcast, Varun.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the great introduction here, Mr. Hayden. Really like the PowerShell edition here.
Yes, I know that's a favorite of yours. How have you been?
Yeah, it's been a fantastic day. Looking forward to this podcast and sharing my views on some of the technologies and some of the introductions by M365.
Yeah, I'm very excited to hear your thoughts on those. It's good to have another person to talk to rather than talking to myself, and I'm sure you'll have more to say about some of these topics than I will. So
I'm sure.
So let's get into it. We have quite a few things to get through today. So mark this date in your calendar, 17th of August, 2021. That is the day that Internet Explorer 11 will ride into the sunset. That's right, Microsoft have announced Internet Explorer will no longer be supported for Microsoft online services like Office 365, OneDrive, Outlook, and more. So, Varun, this is a pretty big deal. I think all of us grew up using Internet Explorer throughout their lives. Possibly for a lot of us, Internet Explorer was the first ever browser we used, and kind of over the last decade, we've kind of it's been the default browser. But I'm keen to hear your thoughts. What does end of support really mean, and how will it affect the approximately there's 2% of all people who use browsers globally are still actually using IE. So what does end of support mean for them?
So first of all, this is a big news of this year that it's gonna end of life. And obviously we saw that coming because Internet Explorer is like not the go-to the browser anymore. Obviously for a lot of people, even for myself, it was the first browser that I ever used on Windows 98. But it was a bit surprising, and we saw that coming, that it's gonna happen. And in terms of end of life, how Microsoft is gonna do is they're gonna do it in a gradual manner. So from November 30th this year, they're going to stop the support for Microsoft Teams. So what that means is you won't be able to open Microsoft Teams at all in Internet Explorer. And then gradually they're going to do it for all the other apps. Wow. So by the end of August 17, 2021, all these apps won't be compatible at all with Internet Explorer. So that's how they're going to do it. And then obviously, I have seen that no one really uses Internet Explorer these days. They are more inclined towards using Google Chrome or Firefox. So I think it makes perfect sense that Microsoft rules this product out and then maybe push the users towards using Microsoft Edge, which is another great product from Microsoft, and it's based upon OS Chromium, which is basically on the top of which Google Chrome was built on. So I think it's a great move that Microsoft has done, and it will push the users towards using Microsoft Edge, which also has compatibility with Microsoft Intune.
There you go. So is that the main reason that Microsoft are moving away from Internet Explorer, because they've got this Edge product, or is there more to it?
I think so. In my opinion, the major reason is because of Microsoft Edge, because they want to promote Microsoft Edge towards the end users. And they want to be in the competitive edge with Google Chrome and Firefox. Even though it's built on the top of OS Chromium, they still want to have that competitive edge in the market. And lately, they have been adding quite a lot of features to Microsoft Edge as well, which we'll discuss later.
Totally. I think that's a good point. So you did say that there's not that many people using it, and I think in the grand scheme of things there are, right? I think most organizations have probably moved users away
Yeah.
from it, or even locked it down. But there are still, according to some different articles I read today, actually, there's still 2% of the global users are still using it, right? So that's
Yeah.
equates to millions and millions of people still using it.
Yeah.
So if you're an organization and for
Hmm.
some reason your users are still have adopted or prefer Internet Explorer for whatever reason,
Hmm.
is it what can we do to shift them away to using another browser?
Communication is the key here. I think so. You hire a change manager and do the communication and do the training that these are the features that you will be getting if you move away from the legacy Internet Explorer and move on to maybe Edge or Chrome or Firefox or whatever you want to move to, and show them the benefits. Show them these are the features you're going to get. These are the privacy features you're going to get, and show them the cool features. For example, Chrome and Firefox have some cool features where you can send your current tab directly to your phone, which currently Internet Explorer does not have it. So I think so. Communication is the key here.
It's kind of a sad day as well, right? Like
It
it's
is. It,
Internet
a lot of
Explorer.
memories are
Yeah,
involved in this.
it's kind of tip our hats and
Yeah.
say goodbye to Windows Explorer. As much as of a pain it has been, and how poor the experience, in my experience, has been with it for a while. I think we can appreciate the service that Internet Explorer has
Yes.
given us
Correct.
over the years.
I'm
Fantastic.
sure
Well,
everyone would have some bitter and good memories involved with it.
in more browser news, I didn't think that this show would all be about browsers, but so far so good.
Yeah.
And I don't. This is not a product that I was expecting also to be interested in today, but I think it's
Hmm.
worth talking about. So bear with us. We are talking about Bing. Now, if that kind of sends a shudder down your spine, I understand why. But the Bing and the Office 365 teams have been collaborating. And basically, what they've been trying to do is combine insights about your Office 365 platform in the Bing homepage. So all you have to do is log into Bing on Chrome or Edge using your Office 365 account. And when you log onto the homepage, you get insights from different data that's being sent to you out of Office 365 into the Bing search window before you've even searched anything. So Varun and we've tasked ourselves with trying to use Bing as our default browser and as to get insights into Office 365 the last couple of days. So Varun, keen to hear, what was your experience like using the Bing/Office 365 experience?
To be honest, it was pretty surprising. So I set the default for being on Microsoft Edge. The reason for that was because obviously Microsoft Edge has SSO inbuilt. So I thought, what the hell, why not do it with Microsoft Edge? And my initial thoughts were like, it's pretty surprising that how they have like collaborated with the Office 365 team to build this feature. And you pretty much get an overview of what's happening inside your team and inside your enterprise as well. Like if you have access to the certain teams area, you will be able to see what your team members are currently working on, what's your schedule looking like, and what documents you worked on yesterday, and what's your to-do list for today or tomorrow. And another fantastic feature I found out was, so in Bing, if you type in your team member name, it will actually give you all the details about them. So it will tell you about who is their current line manager, what's their schedule looking like. And I did some cheeky research on you, Mr. Hayden, and
All right.
the results were quite fantastic. So it gave me your schedule for today, who's your line manager, and your LinkedIn profile link as well. And one interesting thing I found out was you were named in the 2014 Deacon Commerce Alumni report. It also gave me
Yeah,
that
right.
result. So it's quite interesting that how much insight it can give you about one of your team member. So there you go.
There you go. Um, Interesting. So my experience was much the same. I was
Hmm.
surprised by how useful some of the things were.
Yeah,
So certainly, the biggest insights I got was around schedule
yeah,
and searching for my own documents and having those just natively appear. And if you are one of those people that kind of comes into the day thinking, oh, I really want to get this one thing done, and just comes in and doesn't check your calendar and
Mm.
starts working on things, and then you go to search for something
Yeah.
on Bing, and then there's a reminder that says, hey, you've got this meeting in 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I haven't prepared for that. So that was something that was I found quite useful.
Mm.
And that was pretty much the main thing, really. Were there any kind of advantages for you? It sounds like you pretty well covered it. What about disadvantages?
For advantages, I would like to add some points there as well. So I was doing
Yep.
some more deeper research on Microsoft website, and I
Okay.
actually found out that you can customize the landing page of the Bing. So that can be customized based upon your organization. So let's say if you are a pretty large organization, and let's say you're in the finance industry, and
Mm-hmm.
you have something happening in the finance world, so you can basically show that news on that landing page for the end users. So they can pretty much be updated about what's happening in the finance world related to their enterprise. So I think so
Cool.
that's another interesting feature.
Is that something you would do in the Office 365 portal or Intune, or how does that work?
So that works via the Office 365 portal, and I'm pretty much sure we can do it via Intune as well.
Cool.
And another thing I found was this feature is currently only available in the US. So they're going to gradually roll it out to other regions of the world.
Got it. Got it. Very
Yeah,
good. Well, it's only been out for a short amount of time.
yeah, yeah.
Any disadvantages that you noticed?
So disadvantages not really, but initially I think so the information that I was getting out of Bing was quite overwhelming in terms of like it was showing me what my other team members are working on and what I worked on yesterday. I know it sounds a bit vague, but for me it was kind of a bit of overwhelming amount of information
That's fair.
because I have the SharePoint synced down to my file explorer. So I have a pretty focused set of work that I do every day. But this was like I have the access to all the information in one go. Took time, but it's not really a con, but I think so. It's yeah,
Yeah,
takes some
no,
time
that
getting
makes
used to it.
sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. The biggest disadvantage for me
Mm.
was that Bing Search still doesn't quite live up to Google. So for,
Yes.
for me, like I was getting all of these insights, but
Mm.
what at the core of it, what is Bing? A search engine.
Yeah.
And it still isn't quite competitive enough with
Mhm.
Google to make me want to change default to it. Like I found myself trying, like actively
Yeah.
trying to use it. And then I found
Mhm.
myself just typing in google.com.au and starting again because I literally couldn't find the information I wanted. And a lot of the information that I was
Mm.
after was in preparation for this podcast, looking at Microsoft material, and I still couldn't find it. So that's the biggest challenge. Varun, what about you? Did you find that there was enough in the platform or in this integration or Bing
Mhm.
in just in general to make you want to switch to Bing as your default search engine?
I would say no. I'm pretty much happy with Google as my search engine. I
Yeah,
feel like Microsoft still has a long way to go on improving Bing as a default search engine.
yeah,
Obviously, with this move, they are gonna like push users to use it, but I think so users they're still gonna stick to Google or some other search engine.
yeah. I'd say I'd agree with you there. I don't think it's quite ready. I mean,
Yeah.
it's serviceable, and I think as we see this integration across platforms,
Yeah.
the fact that it's built to, that all these services support, integrations with Chromium and all that sort of stuff. I think that the value proposition may get to a
Mm.
critical point where all of the other stuff helps, and I think
Yeah.
Bing is just going to continue to improve. So I'd say definitely worth checking out this as a service. And if it works, if you find the search engine works for you, then I think it's a compelling enough reason to switch, in my opinion.
Yeah. And with Internet Explorer going out, I think so it's a perfect product to explore for your enterprise as well. And given Intune has quite a lot of features for Microsoft Edge in terms of control and what kind of bookmarks you can push out and the extensions, I think so it's a worthwhile having a look at it.
Audio transcriptions. Now, this has existed in a lot of different Microsoft features for a while. So
Yeah.
OneNote's had it since 2015. I know that PowerPoint's had similar features as well. And now the transcription service has been introduced into Word. So I'm just keen to, if you can you share a bit of information about what Word transcriptions is?
So I'll just start with the basic definition of transcription. It's like converting speech to a text transcript. And
Yep.
how they have introduced in Word is each speaker is going to be individually separated, and
Mhm.
you can do the recording both offline and in live mode. By live mode, I mean to say is you can just start the transcription mode, and then you can start the conversation, and it will start recording it. The good thing about this is, in my opinion, it's a good thing, but I'm not sure about the other users. It will not show you the live transcript while you are having that conversation. I was reading an article by Dan Parrish, who is the PM manager of Natural User Interface at Microsoft. And he said that research suggests that if you are actually able to see the live transcription, it's kind of distracting if you're having an interview with the other person. So I think so that makes perfect sense to not have in like a live mode where you can see what's actually happening behind the AI. There were certain limitations that I found. So if you're doing an offline recording, you cannot do it for more than 300 minutes or 5 hours.
Right.
So I think so that's kind of a drawback, because how I see is with this feature, they are going to be in direct competition with Otter and Google Recorder app. I think so
Yep.
that was the main purpose of launching this feature in Microsoft Word.
I think I read, now correct me if I'm wrong here, but I
Hmm.
believe you can upload a pre-recorded recording
Yeah.
and into Word online, and it'll transcribe it for you, right? So there's no limit on that size of recording, though, right?
So there is a limit on that as well.
Okay.
So the limit is 200 MB for that file, and
Right.
that can be MP4. So you can even download a video from YouTube and then upload it. But the limit is going to be 200 MB.
Yeah. Right.
Still going to separate the speakers. And then once that is uploaded, you can go in there and actually name the speakers and then drag and drop the conversation that you want to.
Mm.
The only thing you can't do is, so let's say the conversation has been uploaded, and in the navigation bar, you can't really edit the conversation. So you'll have to first add the conversation to the Word document, and then you can do the editing.
Got it. That makes sense. So for me, this is something that as a user, I'm really excited about.
Yeah.
Whenever I'm doing an interview for a case
Hmm.
study or a blog post, the amount of times I have to go back and listen to the recording and type it
Hmm.
out, and sometimes you don't really know what the story is until you've
Yeah.
got it all written out. This is essentially like saving me hours.
Hmm.
So it's a really cool thing. It's been around for a it's been around in other platforms, obviously, for a while. But I think who ask anyone what their preferred um, document uh,
Recorder.
recorder is, and
Voice
they're going to
recorder. Yeah.
say, well, no, sorry. Ask them what their favorite
Hmm.
Word transcriber platform document writing tool is.
Yeah.
Most people are going to say Word, right? So having it directly in the Word platform is a really powerful thing. The limitations is also it's only on Word online, right? So you can't. It's not in the desktop Word app. That's right?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. So that's probably the only other kind of.
Another con on that one was, so let's say if you're recording in the live mode on the Word Online, and by mistake you close that tab, that recording is completely gone. You can't
Oh,
recover
right.
it. So that's a major con that I found while I was testing this feature.
Wow.
So I think so they need to do something about it, or maybe integrate it with OneDrive while you're recording it or something like that.
That sounds
So
like a good. It sounds like probably the way to go is to record it locally,
yeah.
or yeah, and then upload it. Anything else on word transcriptions?
Yeah, I think so. This feature is going to be pretty much useful for the journalist and the students. I would have been stoked if this feature would have been released 3 or 4 years back when I was doing my uni and masters. I would have just simply recorded all the lectures and then just came back home and just do it. So
Yeah,
I
that's
think
true.
so from the marketing from the market that they are targeting, it's basically for journalists and the students.
Mm,
But I don't see why it can't be used for recording your meeting minutes by
mm.
the executive assistants or the service delivery managers for this. So the
Yeah.
scope is quite broad over here, and I think so it's going to be a game changer.
The next topic I wanted to raise is kind of another kind of sunset moment,
Hmm.
and it's the Windows 95 turned 25 years old as of the 31st of August. So we're recording this on the 1st of September. So for us yesterday,
Yep.
Windows 95 turned 25, which is a pretty big deal.
It
And
is.
as a recognition for this, the Windows Insider team released a pretty nostalgic video, and it kind of showed the evolution of Windows 95 to Windows 10, and kind of shared all of the the nav bar and the look and feel essentially of Windows 10 over the years. It was quite short of it. We'll link the video in the description of this podcast and webinar series. Um, uh, were you even alive in 1995?
So the fun fact is Windows 95 and myself, we are of the same age. We both are 25.
There you go.
So we
There
both
you
were
go.
born in 1995.
There you
So
go. So happy birthday, Varun and Windows 95.
yay!
So I would say then probably you don't have too many strong memories of Windows 95. Then what's your first memories of a Windows product?
It was with Windows 98.
Oh
I think
yeah,
so. I was around 6 or 7 years of age, and
yeah,
during summer holidays, we used to go to my cousin's place,
yeah.
and he was the only one in our family who used to have a computer
There you
with
go.
Windows 98, and we used to play Virtual Cop and Future Cop all the
Future
time. It
cop.
was day and night. It's like a robotics game. You are a cop robot, and then you just kill the thieves. So it was like a day and night thing for me, and that's how I used to pass my summer holidays,
There you go.
playing those games on Windows 98.
Yeah, very violent memories, but nevertheless,
Gaming is
still
never
relevant.
violent. Gaming
Yeah.
is never violent. Gaming is always fun.
So I'm a bit older than you, just a few years, and so I did use Windows 95. So
Yeah.
my memories are very much of the user experience. So I remember the big old grey start button.
Mm.
I remember Minesweeper. I remember
Yeah.
Solitaire. I remember MS Paint, and that was probably the most fun. But I would say the thing that always sticks with me is anyone in my generation will remember this, being like very distracted at school and in class, and having the computers in, like, we had the computers in like it was in the middle point of two like portable buildings they put together. He grew up in country Victoria, and in the middle was where there was a couple of computers, and they'd always have their screensaver, and it was the pipe
Yeah.
screensaver, the pipe that
Yes,
goes
I
everywhere.
remember. Yes, I
And
remember.
I would spend hours just watching the pipe screensaver going around and just completely not paying attention at school. So yeah, that was a
Pretty
pretty
great
fond
memories
memory.
you have with Windows 95 then.
Yes, not
Feel-
particularly practical being yeah, but I think it's worth mentioning.
You might be
Um,
feeling nostalgic then.
Yes, so I do advise, go check out the video, put it in the description. It'll bring the memories flooding back, and you'll relearn to love Windows 95. Windows 95 is a good segue. So according to a recent article I was reading in ZDNet, there are 200 million PCs that are still running Windows 7 or older. So when I read that, I thought, Varun, surely most of these computers are running in, some faraway country that has just
Mm.
discovered electricity. But as you look into it, you find that there are lots of organizations in our own backyard in Australia who hold probably very important data about us right now,
Yes.
who are still running Windows 7. So a good example of that is the ATO and the Department of Defense have recently spent $8.7 million to extend their support for all of their Windows 7 devices just another year, just to 2021.
Yeah.
What's going on here, everyone?
I mean,
What
they could have used that money to put it into the Windows 10 project. Like,
it's not like they haven't had enough notice. It's been very well documented that
yes.
Windows 7 is gone. It's going. Okay, so we know that it's going. We know that they've probably just bought the
Mm.
support to buy themselves some more time, because they didn't give themselves enough time to move up to Windows 10. Sorry, maybe they've got a whole bunch of legacy applications that still need Windows 7. Who knows?
Yeah.
But what is the risk of using Windows 7 today?
The risks are huge. Like if you were reading about WannaCry, that happened for all the systems that were running on Windows 7 and XPs and 98. So I think so the risk here is in terms of your data. The hackers that they can hack into your network and do all sort of things. So I think so for all the enterprises who are still running Windows 7 and they are just thinking about, okay, yeah, it's going to be a big project. There's going to be a lot of money involved. The users, they're going to resent about it. I think so it's high time that they start looking to move to Windows 10. And yeah, if they are still running Windows 7, I think so it's a huge security risk and they need to think about the cost involved with it. So let's say if they have a cyber attack on their network and all the Windows 7 machines get compromised, think about the financial loss in terms of the data that can be compromised, the legal issues, and the name and shame that's going to happen in the media. So I think so if you compare the costs, I think so it's a good way to go to Windows 10 and upgrade all the machines.
Indeed, and so I think I touched on it before, but what do you think are the key reasons that are holding people back from moving to Windows 10?
I think so. It's more around the end users who are quite accustomed to using Windows 7, and they really don't want to move to Windows 10. But I'll tell you one this thing: with all the rollouts that I've done for moving the users to Windows 10, they find Windows 10 much more better in terms of user experience, and they get pretty excited about it. So I think so. If your enterprise is not looking to upgrade to Windows 10 just because the end users they're like, nah, we don't want to do it. We are quite accustomed to using it, or we feel comfortable about it. I think so. Communication is the way to go about it. Give them the user training and then get onto it. Do it.
Yeah, and I think like what user training really like
I
it's
mean,
yeah
there's still
yeah.
going to be some people who are going to be non-IT tech guy who really don't know how to operate around it. But
Mm,
yeah,
mm. Very good. So yeah, the message is not sure why we're still talking about it, but Windows 7 bad, Windows 10 good.
just go and do it.
Yeah.
If you're listening to it, just go do it.
Well, mate, it was a pleasure having you on.
Same
Thanks for
here.
coming, and we'll have to get you on again in a couple of weeks.
Sure. Looking
Hope you had
forward to it.
fun.
I've had heaps of fun.
Fantastic, mate. All right, well, we'll see you next time. All the best, mate.
Yeah, no worries. Cheers.
Our next guest is not only a maestro with guitar, but also a conductor when it comes to backups. Tim Khalil, welcome and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show.
So I'm pretty excited to have you on the show today, Tim, because you delve into an area which I have very little knowledge about, and I'm excited to learn a bit more about it. But before we get into it, I'm keen to share with our listeners. You've got a new role recently. Why don't you tell us about it, about your new role at Fast Track?
Certainly. Essentially, this is a role that I've sort of clawed my way into. I've essentially been acting on these components of what I do for quite some time, and the official nature of my title was sort of caught up. But what I've been doing is essentially acting as the systems administrator for our host infrastructure and for our backups. And I've also been collaborating quite a lot with the networking team in terms of uplifting and introducing some QA to our monitoring. So ensuring that all our systems are online, everything's stable and green, making sure that everything's backed up and that the backups are backed up. And just making sure that we can provide the most stable and reliable service to our customers.
Yeah, it's pretty important stuff. I think an area where there's increased visibility needed for the business and for not just ours, but every business really. And
Absolutely, yeah.
I've been noticing you kicking goals over there, and so keep it up.
Thank you.
And I guess that's why we've got you on today. So, this whole backup management thing, it doesn't off on face value, it doesn't sound like the most sexy IT tool. There's no automatic transcriptions.
Mm,
There's not a lot of end user visibility to this sort of stuff,
no.
but it's something that has a real impact on your business continuity, particularly when disaster strikes, or maybe when someone does something they shouldn't.
Mm.
Um, and I wanted to talk about a story that happened a couple of years ago now, but I think does a really good job of illustrating the importance of backup management.
And
Um,
yeah.
so the team at GitLab, which is a DevOps lifecycle tool, very similar to GitHub, similar sort of model. Um, a system administrator was having a particularly bad day, and accidentally deleted nearly 300 gigabytes of their live production data. So, Tim, can you shed some light on what happened here?
Um, it basically your sysadmin at GitLabs had a very, very bad day. So what started out as performing a reactionary maintenance task is turned into catastrophe bit by bit. So it started off with some issues with stability on their production platform, which required them to carry out certain actions. Now, due to some bad documentation, what actually ended up happening, as you said, about 300 gigabytes of data, production data, was deleted. So this is data which covers a 8-hour time frame of projects, comments, user accounts, issues, and snippets.
Crazy.
And things snowballed even further when they realized that not 1, 2, or 3, but 5 fail safes failed to allow them to recover the data. And the impact that led to was an 18-hour downtime, which is like 18 hours of downtime in a month is like every IT professional would agree that is near catastrophic in terms of the maybe even if you want to be really lenient, sub-catastrophic, but it's pretty bad in terms of the financial impact that it can have on productivity for businesses. So yeah,
not to mention the kind of trust and loyalty that's lost from customers, right? Like if you're using that service and it's like, oh, sorry, that 8 hours you spent depositing code and whatnot into your platform, sorry, that's just gone now. Like you're just gonna have to do it again.
Yep, I could see a lot of managers being very, very frustrated, and certainly stakeholders being affected. But worse still, the people who sit there and painstakingly code and write the content that populates those repositories. They would. I know that if I had 8 hours of work just disappeared. Like I get a lot done in 8 hours, so I would be pretty frustrated if that happened to me. Especially if you've allotted time and you've been collaborating and you've gotten a hold of a resource that you've been waiting for a week, and then suddenly you got to start over. You got to reschedule it. The disruption that it introduces. You have to, as a service provider, you always have to assume the worst, and you have to be prepared for the worst.
So they've had 5 fail safes that failed. So were they able to recover any of this data at all?
They were not, unfortunately. So I got quite intrigued when I heard about this incident with GitLab, and if you actually go to their official site, they have a interestingly named article addressing the incident as the post-mortem of the data outage and data loss incident.
So it sounds like they're well aware of the severity of this incident, right?
Yeah, it was. I think by the sounds of things, on the inside of GitHub, they got a bit panicked because some of the words being thrown around in a Google Doc, which they made public to share developments of how they were managing the catastrophe. they used the word meltdown, which doesn't exactly inspire confidence. But when you have a look at the number of places, the number of things that went wrong, the number of ways in which they sort of fell short, because there's so many places in which they could have recovered from this, and so many opportunities that they had for redemption. And unfortunately, their lack of preparedness and the way they were managing their systems didn't lead to a favorable outcome to any of those opportunities for redemption. So, for instance, some of the things that we could certainly learn from this would be, number one, communication. So this is something which I think is really key, because at the time of the incident, this is well before COVID-19, and 100 of their users work remotely. So, and they got to about 98% of the deletion before someone realized, hang on, this is deleting production data. We're deleting people's work. That's what we're doing right now. So I think communication is really, really key. And that's something that I think we need to be really aware of in this season. Just making use of all the resources we have available to us. Like if you're performing a significant sort of a maintenance action, which this was supposed to be, this was a destructive action, which was made by incorrect documentation. I think it would, you're best off being in a video call with people and having those sanity checks, having that collaborative effort, because leaving one person working from home in a room alone with all the responsibility, maybe less, like only one pair of eyes looking at things, it's in isolation, is a recipe for disaster. It's not a good situation. So communication is the first thing I think we can learn.
Before you move on from that, one of the good things I did notice in my research of this meltdown was that on the topic of communication was they were incredible. They seemed to be incredibly transparent about what was. They realized basically it was a major stuff up. There was no getting out of it. There's no hiding the fact. They just blatantly said, "Hey, we stuffed up. We deleted live production data. Here's what we're doing to fix it right now.
Yeah.
Here's the live action list of things we're doing right now to help you out."
Yeah.
And I guess, I think that probably reduced the amount of probably frustration directed, because the users at least knew exactly why they weren't able to access their data, right? What kind of impact do you think that would have on you as a sysadmin who might have been using a service that had been tucked out? Like, what's your take on that? Does that help at all, or does that alleviate any of the impact of losing access to the service? Or
look, it certainly is. I think people at the end of the day, like, every professional is still a human being and still has emotions and still needs to be managed. Part of business is dealing with people, and I think the way that you handle your people can make all the difference in a catastrophe like this. And for me, certainly, if I was left in the dark and there was no communication going on, I would be incredibly frustrated, where on the other side of that, I find out everything that's gone wrong and everything that's failed. And that would certainly give me the sense of being betrayed and make me very unlikely to want to continue doing business with a service provider like that.
So knowing what's going on is probably key for you to not just throwing that service out and saying, nah, knowing, just thinking about it and going, okay, there's a human behind here. They've made a mistake. When no one's so that
no one's perfect.
No one's perfect. That's what I was looking for. Okay, that's good to know. What else did you learn from the incident, Tim?
The other thing too is that where this all started was incorrect documentation. So the process that the guy who deleted the data was supposed to follow they came out and said, look, it wasn't documented correctly, which is why they ended up mistakenly deleting that data in the first place. So documentation and processes, clear documentation of processes is key and is really vital to good systems administration, and especially with a customer facing service, with any service really. I think documentation is important everywhere. Yeah. The other issue is that the reason that the fail safes, the replication of the data wasn't functional at the time, it was actually technically out, I think, for about 8 hours, hence the 8-hour data loss, because there wasn't coverage for that period of time. So it occurred because there was a CPU spike. So from a systems and server management point of view, there clearly wasn't some good monitoring going on. They weren't in the know as soon as something broke. So there's a question of resource allocation here, because the CPU spiked and it broke something, and there's also a question of monitoring. So making sure that you're reporting on and displaying, even having a real-time dashboard for your systems, so that you know the second something goes down. And
or even before that, right? Being able to identify
absolutely.
the trends and say, look at this, we need to do something, or something's going to go bang.
Yeah. So even if they didn't have their resources allocated correctly, having the monitoring in place might have helped them see, hang on, the CPU's going up. We got to do something. We got to move these services around. We got to migrate these VMs. Whatever it is they had to do, they could have managed it better with proper monitoring. They could have dramatically decreased the impact of the incident. So, yeah.
Did we learn anything else, or is that those are the key things, right?
So communication, documentation, resource allocation.
Yeah.
Oh gosh, the last one doesn't rhyme. Monitoring and reporting.
We'll get there. We'll have to think of an anagram or something. We can.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So what can we do? What are the steps that we can take? Are those the steps that we can take to prevent that from happening to us?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to think that we're doing all those things.
Yeah.
I believe that we are. We have excellent communication, certainly within the Fast Track team. We document like crazy, and then we document some more. We are always working to improve our visibility of the way that we have our resources allocated, and we certainly have a lot of monitoring going on, and we're always working towards expanding our monitoring and our visibility and our reporting, because it does. The idea here is that they found themselves in a position of reactive maintenance, and you pull out the documentation pillar and the rest of it sort of crumbles down. So we really try to work towards having proactive maintenance as opposed to reactive, seeing where things are going and being in control of the resources.
And it's interesting you talk about that, that visibility. And I think if you haven't got those live metrics or those reporting metrics nailed down, I think what we've learned as an organization over the past sort of decade or so is that if you don't know what to report on, just report on something, because the sheer act of actually pulling out that data allows you to sort of see, okay, well, this data is not useful, but maybe this part is, we need to expand on this. So that's kind of the way we've operated over the last decade, is just visualizing it more and iterating on it until you get the perfect view, which, the perfect view never exists, but the more you can consolidate into a single kind of pane of glass, the better, I think.
Absolutely.
I want to throw another question at you, another scenario at you.
Yeah, sure.
I think this is probably something that a lot of IT professionals have probably had over their career at one stage or another. So just like imagine you've started a new role, And it sounds like a fantastic role. And this is, another organization. Maybe you've moved to a bigger organization, and the way they talk about managing their server and infrastructure, VMs, environments, seems miles above, maybe what's been at your previous organization. And you get into it and you're like, wow, this is really cool. So much documentation, blah, blah, blah. And then as you spend a bit more time, you find they've got a few legacy systems that no one really spoke about in an interview process. And as you dive into these legacy applications, services, you find that there are some platforms and some systems that are a complete mess. And it's literally, you don't know what's what. There's no documentation. It's pretty much unmanageable. What do you do? What's the first thing you do, and why, to tackle that situation?
Okay, so I've seen this sort of thing before. First thing you got to do is blame everything on the guy that was there before you. Second thing you got to do is tell everyone what a horrible mess it is so they feel great. Number 3, you got to say, don't worry, I'll fix it.
Yeah.
And then we're going to make a little trip down to the server room. You're going to take a bunch of electromagnets, a jerry can, an ignition source, and some Metallica albums. But in all seriousness, though, the first thing you need is, we talked previously about visibility, and there's a very common theme here. So the first thing you need to do is take inventory of everything that you have. And this can be very difficult because these resources could be spread everywhere. You could have stuff on VMware. You could have stuff in like Cloud vSphere. You could have Azure VMs, Hyper-V VMs, even stuff running in OpenStack. So hopefully there's no enterprise businesses using VirtualBox for their machines. That's the training wheels of virtualization as far as I'm concerned. But you never know. So the idea is to compile everything that is in the system. Even if there are resources that don't seem attached to anything in particular, because there's always that one server that's got no documentation. You have no idea what it does. Make a note of it, because sooner or later, if you decide to turn it off, you might realize that was the server that was handling Azure AD Sync, or the server that was performing a licensing service for some legacy financing software for someone in the company. You don't you don't know. So take inventory of everything, gather everything you have, and after that, you need to unify those resources in a common place. So personally, I'm a fan of Microsoft's System Center suite. So Virtual Machine Manager is a fantastic tool that you can use. You could gather all of the servers, all of your hosting environments from data centers across the world. You could have them in the one place. You could even have your Azure VMs organized in there. So by connecting all that stuff in the one place in a suite like SCVMM, you can immediately start to pull down some data using PowerShell. You can export CSVs. You can see what your resource allocation looks like from a very basic level. There's some very sort of rudimentary tools even within VMM to sort of see what your resource allocation is. But if you expand it and use some of the other tools within the System Center suite, such as Operations Manager, you could start to use SQL to project what your needs are, what your requirements are, how big is the data growing? Have I got the resources I need to sustain this? Have I got enough memory to continue providing servers to rapidly expanding customer? You can really by having that visibility, it enables you to manage those resources well. and PowerShell is essentially what you could use to drive everything. Like when you're starting off as a systems administrator, you're going to very quickly, you're either going to burn out or you're very quickly going to learn how to use PowerShell. It's one or the other, basically.
Yeah, there's a lot of PowerShell script chat I see in the Teams channels out there. I think it's a get on it. If you're not using PowerShell, get on it. It's a pretty important tool. It saves you a lot of time, and it really, for us, it helps us do more quickly. Basically you take your learnings, transcribe it into a PowerShell script and say, here, you now know how to do this, just run this script.
Yeah. And it's a scalable thing too. Once you've got that script figured out, you can pass it to your support guys, and you can scale out and document and process everything. You're not having to do things yourself. You can build automation into your servers. And the other thing too is you don't have to figure it all out on your own. There is so much documentation. You don't even have to build it all on your own. There are repositories all over the internet full of fantastic pre-built scripts, and all you got to do is change some variables, and very quickly you can get a pretty great report in a HTML file of all your systems, of all your servers, what their replication status is, how many checkpoints your VMs have, whether you've over-provisioned your storage requirements and your VMs just haven't eaten all the data yet. There's all sorts of resources out there. You are not alone as a systems admin. It's a good feeling.
Just don't go looking at GitLab expecting to find.
No, don't go there. Don't go to GitLab.
No, I don't know.
I'm sure they've done a lot better. Look, they've been very forthcoming. In that post-mortem article, they've even shown us. They go to quite a lot of detail in terms of explaining the fail-safes they put in place. Like, I don't want to come across like we're bashing GitLab, because one thing's for sure, they won't make that mistake ever again.
Yeah, you learn a lot as an organization from your failures. So I'm sure they have some of the most robust backup management replication processes in the business. So yeah, very good. That's a really good overview. Thanks for that, Tim. I think the last thing I want to talk about ties those things both in fairly nicely together. So there's been a lot of chatter in market at the moment about backing up Office 365. When I first heard that, I was like, what? Like, why do you need to back up Office 365? Doesn't Microsoft back up Microsoft 365? So my first question is to you, Tim, why would you need to back up Office 365?
That's a very reasonable question. I think the thing is, like, Microsoft have redundancy upon redundancy upon redundancy in place to make sure that they can provide you the service you signed up for. And that is to provide you uptime and access and some very limited version history in your 365 tenant specifically for SharePoint and for OneDrive. Now, just because they have redundancy upon redundancy in place, it doesn't mean that they are offering you a robust solution to back up everything in your Office 365 tenant that you would need. So, for instance, what happens if someone leaves your company 6 months later, and you have a policy where you delete users after 30 days or so, and then 6 months later you realize you needed a bunch of stuff in their inbox to pursue a contract or something of that nature. You really wouldn't have any mechanism in place to do it. And even with whatever Microsoft support can conjure up for you, whatever they can do, they will not offer you the kind of retention policies that a lot of businesses require legally in order to sustain their business and in order to have proper hygiene and completeness in their records.
That's pretty compelling reason to be thinking about backing up
Absolutely.
Office 365. And if you're thinking about, where does your most important data live? It's going to be in Office 365, right? Like if you got SaaS apps, all that sort of stuff, okay. But, I think we underestimate how much of our data actually, excuse you, Tim, lives in Office 365. So you touched on some of those scenarios. So what are some of the other scenarios which we're protecting against when we're talking about backing up Office 365?
Well, it may surprise some people to learn that about 40% of the restoration requirements are caused by accidental deletion of objects. I mean, there's a bit of a theme here with accidental deletion. It's quite a big thing in IT in general.
Human element is the most dangerous element in all of IT, right?
That's right. Things don't delete themselves. Not usually anyway.
Yeah.
But yeah, so accidental deletion's a really significant contributor. According to Veeam's statistics, 20% of the other reasons why people often need to restore data that is otherwise not retrievable by Microsoft in their tenant is malicious activity from inside or outside the organization. It's not, unfortunately, in this day and age, it's not necessarily too rare that someone that's disgruntled within the organization may perform some malicious actions on their last day, or even external malicious sources such as malware and viruses. Things like this do happen. Users getting locked out of their accounts, even in the worst case scenario, global administrators getting locked out of their accounts. That's
talking about catastrophic events. Surely that's got to be up there.
Yeah, it really has to. It really has to be. But I mean, these are all things that Microsoft support won't necessarily be able to guard you against. And the biggest argument, I think, is that they don't have a set and reliable retention policy. The nature of Microsoft is that their product is constantly evolving to the needs of businesses. And because of that, their policies around the way that they handle data are constantly evolving, which means that you can't guarantee, 2 years down the track that they're still going to be able to restore that object which was accidentally deleted. Apologies there. A bit of this is just my cat's little boom mic coming into the screen.
This is the dangers of working from home.
Absolutely. It's he's actually been quite good today. I expected him to be all over the screen by now. But certainly backing up your entire Office 365 tenant and keeping a retention policy in place so that you can go back to any point in time and retrieve any object, not just OneDrive, not just SharePoint, but Exchange, Teams data. Being able to retrieve that data from a set period of time can make all the difference for businesses around the world.
All right, well, I learned a lot, Tim, so thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure having you on. I'd be really keen to get you on again. I think you certainly bring a different point of view to the speakers we've had on so far. So yeah, I'd love to get you back on in a couple of weeks. But yeah, it was great, and we'll see you soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much for having me.
It's my pleasure to introduce our final guests. I'll start with the man who is almost always late, but today he's atoned for his constant lateness and arrived on time. Welcome, Bilal Chisti. Thanks for joining us on time today.
Thank you. I like to keep people on their toes,
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Never know what to expect, but we're always prepared. We hope for the best, prepare for the worst with you, Bilal, and that always seems to work out well for us. And yes, indeed. And introducing our final guest, the Aviator. It's catching on. Welcome, Yoni.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Is it catching on? Are you just catching it on, or
It's going to be when this
thing?
When this podcast goes viral, which is a really odd saying. I don't think people say that anymore.
A viral podcast.
Yeah, but I think it'll catch on.
I don't think you're allowed to say virus anymore. Like, it doesn't have the same ring to it as it used to.
No, it's not. There's not the positivity associated with going viral at the moment, is it?
No, probably not.
And so we know that with multi-cloud, it makes sense to allow our customers to connect to the cloud services that enable them to be productive. We know that no one's fully investing in one particular cloud. It's not going to happen. But there are some challenges around multi-cloud and making it work practically that I want to talk about today. But I might lead off with this one, Bilal. Can you give us a quick overview of what multi-cloud is and expand on my very layman? Layman is the word I'm looking for.
Lame. I thought you said lame.
I did say lame.
Oh, right.
It was equally lame as it was layman.
Got
Explanation of why businesses...
It's from the same root.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, exactly. So, Bilal, can you give us a quick overview of what multi-cloud is and why businesses are adopting this approach?
Well, actually, you weren't that far off. Multi-cloud is a fancy way of saying that you have resources based in multiple cloud providers. They don't have to be just like infrastructure, like just IaaS. More and more services, especially SaaS services, are moving to the cloud. And it's not so much like, so yes, companies are adopting cloud platforms, but a lot of times their hands are being forced as well because the products that they're using, they're moving to the cloud. So you don't really have an option. So you have your current product is on end of life, and then you have to move to that particular one.
Yeah, it's pretty true. Like at the end of the day, you can be the most, dyed-in-the-wool Microsoft shop in the world, but at some point you got, roll out a new HR solution, and those, like, let's face it, those guys hosted that SaaS product in AWS. And so, doesn't matter whether you like it or not, that's the way it's going, right?
And you're going to be driven by what your users or your customers want, right? Like the game is productivity. You want great business outcomes, and you're not going to get you may not get a great business outcome being defined by what cloud you're in. You have to be, what is the best solution?
Yeah, and it's like IT are driving those decisions less and less as the external SaaS providers make those decisions. Like you look in our business, Hayden, you're probably the last guy in the whole team to be making like qualitative decisions about which cloud platforms we use, right? No offense. But yet you still dictate the terms on that because you say, oh, I want to use, HubSpot or Marketo or whatever it is. And then, like, do you know where HubSpot's hosted?
AWS.
Yeah,
AWS.
The lucky guess. She might be Google. But yeah, anyway, the point is that it's like, it's the functionality that's driving these SaaS services, and like they go wherever they want to go.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's that as well. And even if you, as an organization, have all your resources within one particular platform, your third-party vendors will have services outside. And especially for larger scale companies, even mid-sized companies, when you start outsourcing certain things, you still have control over the area where you own, but what about the ones you don't? So you say you're in Azure, one of your vendors is in AWS, the other is in Google Cloud. They're all perfect, you have good connectivity to them, but now so your database is on one of them, your financial services on something else, and you need to constantly ping to them. Then suddenly there's a huge variation comes in, because those providers are guaranteeing you good performance within their cloud, but to get to something else, that is not part of the promise that they're giving to you. And that is where the complexity sort of comes in, where more and more stuff comes in there. So how to ensure that primarily what the user experience is good. Like, this is not just what we want to do. This is a solution to a problem. And the problem is like to get the user experience as close as optimal as possible.
So that's a good segue. So obviously, IT professionals now know, and businesses know that ultimately, every time we adopt a new service, we're going to consult with IT still, but ultimately, the decision is what's the best solution for the people using the tool, the platform, whatever. So we know that we can't just be an Azure shop or a AWS shop or a Google shop, whatever, right? We've accepted that multi-cloud is a thing, and that's where we're going, right? So, but that introduces a whole bunch of other challenges, right? What are some of the challenges, guys, that we're seeing our customers run into when they're adopting these multiple clouds solutions?
So first of all, obviously there's an issue, obviously we're having multiple clouds, but even if you take a step back, not all organizations are just purely in the cloud. A lot of them are hybrid solutions where they might have something on-prem and then something within the cloud. So then comes the question of actually connecting that cloud in the first place. And then later on connecting different cloud resources back to the on-prem stuff or between the different things. And the more that happens, the more variations that's come in. And I think, so two issues. One, obviously the variations and the areas where you have no control over. And point number two, the issue of governance. It's very difficult to see from an outside perspective, like how everything is connecting together. And unless you implement a proper strategy and a plan, which we'll discuss later on, these issues will still keep on popping up.
Another thing, Bilal, is that it might not be practical or desirable to build multi-cloud solutions using SD-WAN technology in all cases. So in a simple case, you've got some IaaS in Azure and some IaaS in AWS, and you want to connect those to each other. You could put some kind of VPN between them.
Yeah.
But then you lose control of the path that traffic takes. So from a performance point of view, and you lose the single external point where you can firewall, for lack of a better word, the traffic between each other. And it also relies on the fact that you have access to both sides to put a device.
Yeah.
And so what if you've got 90% of your platform sits in AWS, and then there's some particular component that lives in a public Azure service that you can't get to that way? How do you control the traffic? I think there's just lots of permutations of what multi-cloud actually looks like. Like you say, it's not just IaaS to IaaS here. And so it's a complicated problem.
So if we think about some of the problems we've seen come up in customers we know, without naming names, can you guys think of any of the problems that we've encountered and how we've solved them, or what's the common thread in this area, and how are we solving that?
So one of the things is like where you have your infrastructure, right? And you want to connect to a different cloud. You've already invested or you haven't invested in a particular thing, but you still want to have the benefit. Suppose traditionally, like you wanted to connect to a different cloud provider, you need to be in the same data center as them to connect to them. That has running costs, monthly costs, investment, so on and so forth. And that connection needs to be there should be like a lot of traffic flowing for that to be like financially viable to make that decision. So that's one issue that they have as well. And then connecting to those services, not having the local expertise in-house to actually make those decisions and architectural decisions. So those are the things, something come up as well. So that's where
consistency of management, right? Like,
yes,
it's a lot of organizations that we deal with are driven to have a consistent connectivity platform that connects all the different parts of their environment to each other. They don't want to have a VPN here and a SD-WAN device there and a whatever else connecting it together. So consistency, I think, is a theme of, it's one of the challenges that you often face trying to
And
connect
and how are we solving for that then? Like, what are the is there a single solution that we think, okay, this is the best way to achieve consistency in this space, or is it user case by user case?
The key thing for normally is to find some central place or central places where you want the multiple cloud connections to aggregate with each other, and then build around that. And then have a platform that's flexible enough. Obviously, we've spoken in the past about our use of the Vios platform, but any kind of virtual routing platform allows you to connect different things together that might look different to begin with, and you kind of stitch them together in some central location.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What we usually provide to customers, as a solution to the problem that they're having, or trying to get this work, is, as Johnny mentioned, a virtual cloud router sitting in one place, and that acts as an aggregation point. So rather than having all these different connections connecting into different edge devices in different places, if they're all connecting in one place, you only need to manage a pair of HA devices. It's a lot easier to manage. It's a lot easier to govern. And from a financial point of view, it's all connected into one place. Traditionally, you needed to have your own setup there to get that rolling up. But as the market has changed, that isn't really the requirement anymore. For example, some of our customers go with a cloud router hosted on our platform. So we have a managed device sitting in the middle. Say they want to connect AWS to Azure to another provider as well, which might be a SaaS or an IaaS. And that needs to tally with something in their IaaS environment. You have that machine in the middle on our platform, and then we connect to those different cloud providers. It can be via their proprietary ones. Say with Azure, you might have express routes. With AWS, you might have direct connects. But with the other providers who might not have their own proprietary stuff, we can still use other third-party vendors to provide a stable, guaranteed SLA managed layer to link, rather than going over the public internet where you only know where the next hop is, and after that, you don't really have much control over that.
Yeah.
And that allows you to
I had something to add
just
just on the choice of location for where you should put your aggregation point for your multi-cloud environment. It's like something to consider is that, in the first instance, you might think, oh, well, most of our infrastructure is in Azure, so we'll put our multi-cloud routers in Azure. The biggest challenge that you come across doing that is the flexibility to then stitch different cloud environments into it. So when you're selecting where those routers sit, because there's lots of options there. There are cloud providers that have their own virtual routing platform. There are data center providers that have their own virtual routing platform, and then everything in between. The problem you've got is that say you've got an environment where you want to connect some Azure, some Express Route, some Direct Connect. You've got a couple of virtual circuits that go over some data center exchange or something, like the Equinix Cloud Exchange, for example. Then you've got a layer 2 link that you've bought from a carrier, and then you've got a dark fiber cross connect that goes to another cloud provider that might be in the same building, right? How do you stitch all of that together in a location that only allows direct connect or express route to get out from? So that's always been my consideration, is that wherever you put that aggregation point, you need to be able to stitch whatever you want into it.
Exactly. So I think one of the things is when people hear the word cloud, there's obviously a bit of misunderstanding sometimes as well. Everything is just highly available everywhere, which is not actually the case. Obviously, those cloud providers are balancing stuff, but they have physical presences in data centers.
Yeah.
So depending upon your need, you don't have to go to a cloud provider to connect to that. You just need to actually get closer to those providers' infrastructure, and then let them handle the part to there as well. Let them do the
you hang out in data centers for long enough, and you realize that as you walk down the aisle, it's like, oh, that's on-prem, and then in the next rack over, that's the cloud.
Exactly.
And you go another couple of cages down, oh, that's on-prem.
Also,
Exactly.
We used to have different words for cloud and on-prem. It used to be your data center or my data center. If it was in your data center, it was on-prem. If it's in my data center, it's the cloud.
Yeah.
And another advantage of this system as well, it's just like not connecting, like I said, multi-cloud. It's connecting from your own environment to those cloud services as well. It might be your infrastructure or it might be your offices. So say you're using like Microsoft products, or if you have your virtual machines, say you use a VDI environment, they're based in Azure, or you're using Amazon workspaces. But a lot of people are actually coming into the office and accessing them. Then you need a good connectivity from your office to the cloud as well. And that's simple enough. So if you have that aggregation point, which is connecting to everything else, you simply have another interface on there, just going to your managed WAN. And suddenly everything on your corporate infrastructure, like corporate network, has a direct path to that particular service. And it doesn't need to go over anything else. It's on a stable SLA managed link. And again, better user experience. And that's basically what you're after.
Question. So it sounds like it's quite important, obviously, where you put that aggregation point. But in the context of building your multi-cloud strategy, for lack of a better word for it, it's not stagnant, right? Like it's not where you're not going to get to a point where you're like, okay, I've added all the services that I'll ever add to my environment now. I am done. Like tick, we've got the aggregation. It's an evolving thing. You're constantly adding new services and swapping out applications and services as they become less and more relevant to your organization and to your users and to your customers. So is the where you place that aggregation point, is that the single most important thing for enabling you to optimize and iterate on the clouds that you connect to, or are there other things you can do to simplify and optimize those connections?
The aggregation point in a way does simplify those connections. That's like one of the reasons why you're implementing it as well. It is important to know, obviously, like it's very important to know where you're placing it as well. But there's flexibility in it as well. So say if you're not going with your own service, if you're going with the third-party provider, you're not investing in the colo and everything else to get those services, and they're providing a managed service for you. But say you have another spot, say you're going overseas, you can have another aggregation point there as well, and then connect these points together. As long as that you have those things together, there's lots of room for expansion. It's very easily scalable, but at the same time, the cost of governance and of maintaining it doesn't scale up on the same level. So you have your initial setup, and after that, you can scale up services, but the time taken to actually maintain those things doesn't scale at the same rate. So it's more advantages as you go more and more.
So you're saying that those aggregation points don't take that much to manage. Is that what you're saying there?
As more and more services come up, like once you have your base set up, after that it's a lot easier to scale. It's a lot easier to implement new services, especially if it's an area where you have like a lot of providers where you can simply just spin up a new service within a couple of days rather than traditional
couple of minutes.
Yeah, exactly. Rather than traditional like layer 2 links, which might take weeks and like even months, depending upon where you are.
And does it make sense to like, how easy is it to spin these up as an enterprise or a medium-sized organization? Is it easy enough to create the contacts or learn how to deploy these things yourself, or is there a degree of understanding of the data center environment, the players in the vendors required to stand these things up, or is it something that you can kind of do a bit of research and stand up yourself?
I think more than that. I think you do need a bit more experience in that, especially if something gets broken. In that case, unless you don't have an idea of how everything's set up, you might be thinking it's an issue on your end when, or this is an issue on, say, Microsoft's end or someone else, and you need to be able to pin that up. And this is what I've noticed. Like most organizations don't really want to have that sort of control, so they want to have a control over their maybe internal stuff. And you act like, okay, this is one link going upstream. It doesn't matter to me what's happening in that little black box where it's going. They just want the end result. And that's basically what this is, right? You not want to be adding more complexity to your own organization. You simply go, okay, here's this product. This is the result I want. Get me that.
So,
yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the other way of looking at it is that the answer to Hayden's question is it depends. If you're trying to connect two simple things together, you understand how both those things work, and you've got some way of connecting them together. And there's a dozen different ways you could do that with a dozen different, like I said, lots of providers have like virtual routing layer 3 self-managed platforms where you basically get like a Cisco 1000V virtual router, and if you can hack it up, you can do it. But you're limited to that provider and what you can get in and out of them. And so if that's all you need to do, I want to connect Microsoft and Amazon. It's a pretty vanilla use case, to be honest. Then you could probably do a bit of research and knock that together in a few days. If on the other hand, you've got what we see as multi-cloud, which is like stuff coming from everywhere. It's like, oh, we can only get to this data center via this carrier. We can only get to this, these guys via cross connect. Then you need to have a firm understanding of all of those physical technologies to connect, and then write up the OSI model to understand the physical layout and then the routing protocols being used, and then that provider and how they operate and how to like get them to answer their phone maybe, or work their SDN platform or whatever the case is to actually make it work. So it really depends on what you're connecting to. If you're connecting to 5 things that you understand really well, then it might be simple.
With players like Microsoft and Amazon, because everything's so automated, so it's a lot easier. But even other major players, but who don't have like a baked-in product, like even Accenture, like SAP, those sort of guys, like if you want to set it up, there's no automated everything else. It's via emails, via call. Sorry?
Reputable cloud providers like SAP that just have a fantastic network.
Yes, who doing SaaS like services, right?
He can't even speak anymore.
Yeah. If you need to connect to their network for like a third-party thing, if you're buying a service of them and you need to be connecting to their particular network and you don't want to be doing VPNs, but they don't have a standard product, it's not going to go in a portal and click it up and it's going to establish it. You'll be calling them, you'll be going over emails, you'll be sending over configs, trying to fix it out. Those are the things are where sort of more and more issues come up. Even like more cloud providers, not the major ones, like new up and coming ones who don't have such an automated system. That's where you can get it with.
So it sounds like for me, what I'm hearing here is that, ultimately, if you want a scalable solution where, and I think we all agree that there's going to be no shortage of cloud service providers and other cloud-related technologies that you're going to be connecting to, you really need a simple way of iterating and adding new services to you. And it doesn't make sense to lock yourself into a provider or only a couple of providers. You need an aggregated point of presence, whatever system technology that is.
Maybe it does.
To make it work.
Maybe it does. If you don't anticipate needing anything other than what one provider can give you.
But I mean, how realistic is that? Like, is it likely if you're building a business and you're changing and growing at particularly anyone growing at a fast rate, is it likely that you can anticipate what kind of cloud providers you're going to need? Is that going to be wasted effort if you sit down
Maybe not.
Yeah.
I mean, it comes down to cost and complexity at the end of the day, right? So like, if you decide that you're going to put all your eggs in the AWS bucket, you build all your stuff there, and then you're like, oh, now we need to have some like better connectivity to wherever. Then maybe you can set something up with a VPN over to the other provider or whatever, but it might end up costing you a bunch of money and it might not perform very well. So, but I guess I don't know. I was just like, it was a bit black and white of a statement for me that like every organization must have a multi-cloud environment. So,
It really depends upon the organization as well. So what type of tools they use as well, and what are the tolerances that they have, which changes from organization to organization. Like certain tools, like they have very little tolerance, so you want them to be as smooth as possible. Some, they're only refreshing like every few minutes. Like in that case, so those are those variables which come into play as well.
Yeah.
And how your company is set up as well. Like how spread out is it? Is it localized in one area? Is it spread out across multiple countries? Like then you need to say, okay, one point doesn't really do the trick because you're also in another country as well. So it's a part of a larger question. Like how do you all manage everything together?
Also, it's like, is technology a like internal service for your organization, or is it your product?
Exactly.
So we've got customers with big multi-cloud environments that we manage that, that it's their product, it's connecting parts of their product to each other. Whereas for enterprise organizations that, this is their internal kind of tools that their staff use to go and dig trenches in the street or, whatever, run hotels or whatever it is that their business is, then, those environments might be different. If what you've built is a simple SaaS application that is a database with a web-based front end, it probably just lives in Azure or AWS or wherever, and it's like, yeah.
So,
but if you do have a complicated environment, then you definitely want to make sure that where you put that aggregation point, that you think about that very carefully, because, nothing worse than realizing that, oh, hang on, provider X that hosts my virtual router can't get me to that place. Now what?
Yeah. Well, sometimes people consolidate as well. Like for example, Spotify. So they used to have their own network and everything else, their own CDN. But recently, I think they've announced that they're going with Google Cloud now, because basically it didn't really work for them the way it's scaled. Because they're such a global service, their setup costs and everything else, just maintaining it on their own.
Build data centers everywhere.
Yeah. So yeah. For them, at that point at which they had grown, it made more sense to consolidate into one. So what your requirement would be at one stage might be different. Requirements might change once your company grows into a different stage and your priorities change.
Very cool. Final thoughts on this, gents? I think this has been a pretty useful debate. I think kind of regardless of what size you are, I think there's a little nugget of insight around how to connect and sort of stand up multiple cloud services. Final thoughts from each of you?
I think it's more to do with like you don't want to be doing it just for the sake of doing it. So like whenever you're trying to implement something, it's to solve something or to improve something. So you need to have your end goals in mind, like what are you trying to achieve, and then let the solution be dictated by it rather than the other way around.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And for me, to build on that is just that it's always worth keeping in mind that that there usually isn't going to be one provider that does everything, and so you might think outside of the square. When you've got your solution in mind, then think outside of the square for the ways to solve it, because it's very seldom a one-size-fits-all kind of situation.
Well, thanks, gents. That was fantastic. Great having you to join us again, and we'll see you next time. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining the second episode of the F Team. You can find the F-Team podcast on all the major podcast platforms, including Apple, Google, and Spotify. You can find our webinar on the website, www.ftpl.com.au. And if you've got any questions about anything you heard today, please reach out to us via the website. See you next time.